Crystal Palace 1, Manchester United 2. In the battle of 3-4-3s, Manchester United got themselves an incredibly important 3 points after a very, very poor first half. United were able to turn it round and I think eventually deserved the win. Now, unfortunately, we do have to start off with the first half where United were quite poor, but don't worry, eventually we're going to get to the positives because we did win, and I think it's important to be positive when we do. But first of all, the first half, because it was sticky, it was tough for United, it was a very difficult away game. It felt like a proper Premier League away match, if you know what I mean. Two systems that are very similar to each other are going to match up quite nicely, and it's going to be a lot of battles, a lot of dueling. And in the first half, United struggled with that, particularly on their own goal kicks. Now, we know what United want to do. We actually saw initially in the first phase, United not going quite as direct as what we have done in recent months. But of course, that means we're going to see an interesting structure. De Ligt, the middle centre-back, is going to go into midfield. Casemiro drops alongside him, and the wing-backs are going to drop deeper as well. Now, what was interesting here was how Crystal Palace approached this, because what you might expect from Palace is a man-to-man press. And the reason why you might expect that is because the formations are the same as each other, so surely it makes sense to sort of like match up with each other. But Palace didn't do that. Initially, what they did was they let United have the ball initially with the two wider centre-backs, and the Palace front three just sat off in a very central position. So the likes of Mateta, Sarr and Pino were all really close to each other and almost stopping United from playing the pass into the middle. So we were content, Palace were content with Shaw and Yoro having the ball. They were just sat in the middle a little bit like this. But that changed the second the ball went wide. If Yoro rolled the ball into Ahmad or Shaw rolled the ball into Dalot, that's when Palace then went really aggressive, shot over to one side of the pitch and looked to apply pressure. And I think United really struggled with that in the first half. We didn't really have a way of reliably moving out from the back. And it felt like any time we wanted to move the ball forward, it was going to have to be a duel for us to do that, which isn't always ideal. And as a result, sometimes that meant that we went a little bit more direct. We're not afraid of playing the long ball. The problem was when we did so, we were sort of outnumbered and outmatched in these positions. Mount against Richards is a mismatch. Xerxes didn't do very well with the long duel in the first half, and Mbeumo was very quiet. So for United trying to get up and running in the first half didn't really work. Now, as I will continue to tell you, Manchester United have some absolutely fantastic players. So despite struggling to play through the first phase, there were still moments where we got on the ball, we stopped, and were trying to move through Palace. The problem was, it was all very stagnant. All the players were very still, very stationary, not enough rotations going on, and this is where we saw the system match up really just right in front of our eyes, screaming at us. For Palace, they literally just had to pick up one player each, and United were too rigid with the movement in the first half. There wasn't enough players making runs off of the ball. There weren't enough players going into different zones, sort of asking questions of Palace. We know that if Mount is going to be man-marked here, the defender's going to follow him. But would he still follow him if he went all the way over here? We don't know. But those are the questions that we didn't ask enough in the first half. We didn't really sort of take those challenges. The one thing we occasionally did was push Bruno Fernandes a little bit further forward. So we went almost into a bit more of like almost a bit of a diamond in midfield, like you can see here. And we actually had the overload in the middle of the pitch, but we sort of just chose to ignore it and went wide. Now, before we get into talking about how United were good eventually on the ball, I do quickly want to discuss and cover the defensive side of the game. Because again, Crystal Palace, like United, play in a 3-4-3. However, the way that they look to try and play out from the back is quite different, and therefore the way that United are pressing is quite different. Palace start with a back three, but they try to shift to a back four, like United do on goal kicks. But they do it differently. One of their centre-backs will move out to full-back, and then the other two centre-backs will drop into a centre-back position like this, and then Kamada and Morton, the two central midfielders, will come a little bit deeper. So this is what Crystal Palace are trying to do. It's a little bit different to how United approach these situations. However, what it did mean was that United were also able to lock on man-to-man. It was just slightly different how we did it. So Xerxes and Bryan Mbeumo form a front two, which I think is good to see. I think we like to see United pressing like that. And then Bruno Fernandes and Casemiro can back up in midfield and go man for man. The problem is Palace have a spare player here, but Mason Mount is perfect for this role of sort of starting narrow on the left side and then jumping out for the wide pressure. It was perfect. So what United would do is sort of almost lead Palace towards playing towards the United left, and that's when Mason Mount would then jump. And I think we did this quite well in the first half. I pretty much always feel that we're good at pressing when the opposition have a goal kick. It's open play where I have more concerns, but on goal kicks I think we looked very good with our pressing shape. And then in the second half, you could tell that Palace got very tired. They played 90 minutes on Thursday night with pretty much their full 11, and that started to take a toll. They don't have the deepest squad, and they clearly started to fatigue and United became more feisty, much more intense in the second half. Something that Amorim said at half-time worked, because the players came out with a bit more bite, a bit more intensity, were a bit more snappy in the challenge, and that's what provided the platform for us to then eventually perform. Just to quickly interrupt the video, Manchester United actually won today, so there's a chance to be positive, and why not keep that positive energy flowing by subscribing? Please, that'd be greatly appreciated. We're trying to push towards 85,000 subscribers, and you can really help make like a massive difference. So please do it. Okay, so it's finally time to talk about how United eventually got the ball down and played good football, and at times in the second half sort of blitzed through the Crystal Palace midfield and defence and created a couple of decent moments, despite not still actually having that many opportunities. Now, something we have to remember is Crystal Palace's intensity does drop. They got a 1-0 lead at home. They're tired after playing on Thursday, so they do perhaps naturally drop a little bit, even if they don't realise they're doing it. And at this level of football, just that split-second loss in your timing is going to make a big difference. You know, if Bruno Fernandes has an extra half second, then that's a big difference for a player like him because he's just got elite quality on the ball. So that was one of the problems for Palace. The other problem for Palace was the tactical change that Amorim made, and this was good from Amorim. We often question him mid-game, does he make enough of a difference? But he did two things. He took Lenny Yoro off at half-time for Mazraoui. Felt sorry for Yoro, he had a poor game again. He probably needs to be protected. To be honest, we need to look after him a little bit, maybe take him out of the team for a while. He's struggling at the moment, but that's only natural. He's a very young defender. But Mazraoui comes onto the pitch, and immediately that's going to give us a more technical player, a player that is more willing to join the attack, better at progressing the ball, better at dribbling under pressure. We've got more on the ball now. The other thing we did, though, I felt, was we changed the role of the forwards. I felt Xerxes in the second half was moving much more towards the left-hand side, and Mbeumo was also given a freer role. And at times, to me, it felt a little bit like United ended up in a front two. The average positions sort of point to something similar, with Xerxes and Mbeumo at the front, sort of split either side of the centre. And I thought the freedom that this allowed for the two of them helped United. It was a bit more free-flowing. The criticism in the first half was that we didn't move enough, we didn't rotate, but I think that changed in the second half. And one of the big things we did was we allowed Xerxes to move towards the left, and I think the reason why this was so effective is because we're now rotating, so the players that are man-to-man to us are now being asked different questions. Can Lacroix really follow Xerxes all the way over there? Probably not, because he doesn't want to leave the spaces. I think Dalot did a great job of overlapping sometimes, but also sometimes coming into midfield so that Mason Mount could make the run out wide. And I think these runs off the ball, with Xerxes also dropping, just gave United the ability to get into the game. I think it gave us that thing to latch onto. It gave us that technical base, but also a tactical base, which is good from Amorim, to get back in. We started overloading this side of the pitch, which I think is huge for us to do. And a lot of that was from Dalot sort of pinning, making that high run, pinning Palace back, allowing the likes of Xerxes, Mount and Bruno to all rotate. And these guys are great because they're also technical, they're also good on the ball, all comfortable on the ball, but can all sort of drift and flow into different positions. And I think that's important for all three of them, to have players like that around them, players with similar ideas. I think that's key. And I think we saw that in the second half, these guys sort of working off of each other. And what it also allowed was the overload to then play the switch, which is something that Amorim has tried to use during some of United's better performances in the past season. Where we overload one side like this, we of course inevitably draw Crystal Palace over, and then what we look to do is play the switch. And when you've got Bruno and Mount both on this side, they are both more than capable of playing that pass, like we can see here, and then that allows you to get someone like Ahmad or Mbeumo actually attacking the Crystal Palace back line, which I thought was better from United. It was more flowing, and I think Xerxes and Mount really played a big part in that. I think the other thing that we saw was more willingness and also more desire to actually go and play in the middle of the pitch and combine. We spoke about in the first half, the spaces were there, but we didn't really use them. Second half we did. Now again, perhaps that's because Palace drop off a little bit, you know, not quite as intense, so perhaps those spaces open up a little bit more. But again, I think it's also partly because of our tactical freedom that we changed to in the second half. You can see Mbeumo here, right at the start of the half, dropping in as an extra central midfielder. In the first half, he wasn't doing that so much, not in this position, and that gave United the ability to overload. We also saw some excellent combination play with someone like Xerxes dropping in. And I think, again, when you've got players like Mount, Xerxes, Bruno, and Mbeumo, Casemiro's passing range, all close to each other, that's when I think United can start to play better football. And it's this which allowed us to sort of rip through Crystal Palace in the second half, because they needed to push forward, because United, of course, scored a couple of goals, which we'll come back to. But Palace were now required to step up and be a bit more aggressive, which meant that some of the gaps opened up, and that's when our intensity, our technical quality improves. but also our tactical freedom. The players were able to flow more, create these overloads, overwhelm Palace in the middle, and that's what got us on the front foot on a more regular basis. Now, the final thing that we have to talk about is set pieces, because for all of United's improvements in the second half, it was ultimately 2 set piece goals which won the day for United. And I think that's huge. We have now scored the most set piece goals in the Premier League this season, I do believe, which isn't something that you would normally expect from United. We've been poor at them for a few seasons, but I think this year more than ever, they are huge in the Premier League. If it's a free opportunity to unchallenged deliver into the danger area, and you've got to make the most of those moments. And I think United did. From the first moment, the long throw into the box, Casemiro scrapping, we could have scored there. There was a few corners where De Ligt looked like he might get the better of the Palace players, and then eventually it's just insane quality from the United players. Bruno Fernandes too, good passes, sure, but the quality from Xerxes, first of all, with the touch on the chest, and then the finish is just fantastic. Like, really caught me off guard with that goal, and it does come out of nothing. And I think that's what gave him the confidence in the second half to play with that freedom and to have that flow to his game. I think that really helped him. And then the Mount goal, again, is just a touch of quality. Further proof that Manchester United have some sublime players at their disposal. And I think that really, really helps United. When we're struggling in open play still to create big chances, if you can get 2 goals from a set piece, then it's absolutely massive and it makes your life so much easier. And in terms of how the game then ended, it was almost quite ironic. It was quite funny because Manchester United, of course, you know, we made subs. We took off someone like Ahmad for Dorgu. We dropped a lot deeper. We went into our block, and almost the ironic, slightly funny thing now was that Crystal Palace were trying to break down a Manchester United low block with Mitchell and Munoz, the 2 fullbacks, holding the width and going 1 versus 1. It's almost a problem that we ourselves have seen in the past. So there was a bit of an irony with how this game ended and how Palace were trying to break United down. But United got into that position because in the second half we were much more intense, much more technically secure on the ball. Amorim gave us more freedom and the players performed on set pieces. So yeah, it's an absolutely brilliant win for United. I don't think it's one that many expected. Palace have been very good at home for a long time now. I don't think many expected us to pick up 3 points, especially after the first half. Now, again, just to go back to the first half, I don't want to rip United to shreds about it. I still didn't think Palace were amazing either. They didn't exactly cut through us. But we just looked like we lacked inspiration. We looked like we were playing at Palace's level rather than what should be United's level, which is a push for the top 4. That was my problem in the first half. In the second half, it felt more like we wanted to play on the front foot. I think the intentions were much better. We were trying to play in the right areas. The idea was to ask questions of Palace rather than always the other way around. And I think that's huge. I always say that's how we should be. We should be on the front foot. We should be asking questions. And in the second half, we did that. With that freedom in the attack, Xerxes dropping to the left and Bumo sometimes in midfield or on the right side with Ahmad. Bruno Fernandes taking more of a leading role in the middle of the park. All of those things are what United should be doing more regularly. It's almost a bare minimum. And when we finally did it in the second half, United actually played pretty well on the ball. Still not amazing, but I was never expecting amazing. The bar is, of course, incredibly low right now. But I was impressed with the idea of the second half. I thought it was good. And again, for the mentality of the players, which I think gets questioned a lot unfairly, again, they showed that they do have the mental toughness to stay in the game away from home. At Palace, where it's tough, and to get themselves back in it and then see out the win. So it's a great result for United. It's not an amazing performance. Don't get me wrong. This isn't suddenly everything fixed. But it was important for us to win, particularly with the games that we've got coming up. And I think there are some things that we saw there in the second half that we might be able to build upon more in the future. And we will be covering that during the week. If you want to make sure you don't miss those videos, make sure to subscribe to the channel and get your notifications on so you never miss an upload. And also, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like on the video, that would be kind as well. But apart from that, we are now finished for today. So thank you very much for watching this video. Hope you have enjoyed it. And as always, I will see you in the next one.